Guys, how you guys doing? I'm live on my walk. I want to do another spoken music lesson. I think this one might be very important and very unique and cool. I'm not even sure this topic has been properly spoken of even. But I'm not going to do a rippiato and say I guarantee. I'm not going to do that. But it's not that much talked about. I want to talk about chromatic root movement in chords and how it relates and interacts with circle of fifths circle of fifths root movement with the same chords. In other words, how does moving chromatically up and down the chromatic scale of the chord, how does that relate to, and what's it similar to as far as going up and down the circle of fifths with the same chord? That doesn't get talked about a lot, but here I am doing it. And the two chord types I'm going to talk about in that movement is major triads and dominant seventh chords. I'll just leave it to that for now, and it's something I call hey, love you. So, something I call NVM. It's not non-voluntary military. It's net voice movement, and I'm going to discuss that as part of this topic. So let's start with the major triad. I got this idea from doing Bohemian Rhapsody, from learning it. He does a lot of stuff in that where he'll like, I'll keep this whole talk in the key of A. He'll do like an A, even though, it's good enough. He'll do like an A major triad, then he'll go up to A sharp, and then back down to A, and then down to A flat, and then back up to A. So in other words, it's like chromatic. It's a chord in the center, major triad in the center, and then goes up a half step, back down a half step, then down a half step, and back up a half step. So you're slithering around the chord with chromatic movement. And how that relates to circle of fifths movement with the Pacific harmony I mentioned, which is major triad. Well, this is interesting. If I do the net voice movement, if I go from an A flat to an A, each tone on the average moves up a semitone, because they all do. The A flat moves up to A, because the A flat, A major is A, C sharp, E. A flat major is A flat, C, E flat. So the A flat goes up to A, that's a half step, and all the voices move up a half step. The E flat goes up to E, and the C moves up to C sharp. So all three voices go up a half step. So the net vocal voice movement is up a half step for each voice. What's similar to that in circle of fifths or circle of fifths progressions? Well, that's similar to a 4-1 progression. And if you're talking about major triads, that's similar to a D major to A major progression, where you go from the 4 to the 1. And why is that? Because going from the 4 to the 1 triad, the 4 triad major triad to the 1 major triad is basically the same net voice movement as going up a half step is. Because if you have the D major is D, F sharp, and A. So, wait, I did that wrong, dude. I'm sorry. sorry about that. I meant in this case, the 4 to 1 is going down half steps. The one that's like going up would be the 5 major triad to the 1 major triad. You guys got me there. It's going up is what the 5 does when it goes down to the 1 when you're talking about triads. So what I meant to say is going up a half step for each voice, i.e. A flat major to A major, is a lot like E major to A major. It's the fifth down. It's down the fifth if you're doing triads, because the E major triad is E, G sharp, and B, and the G sharp goes up to the A. That's a half step. The B goes up to C sharp, that's up a whole step, and the and the E stays the same. But did you notice that since one voice went up a half step, one voice went up a whole step, that's 2 half steps, one voice stayed still, that's still net voice movement of +1, of up half a step for each voice averaged in. So going from 5 to 1 in major triads, such as E major to A major, has the same net voice movement as going from A flat major to A major, going up a half step from the triad, from a triad to half step below up to the triad you're talking about. And then the reverse is true. If you go down, go in the opposite direction. So if I have an A major triad and I go up to an A sharp major triad and then back down to A major triad, what's that movement like? That movement is like the 1-4-1 in triads. One major, which is A major, which is A, C sharp, and E, to D major, which is D, F sharp, and A, then back down to A major, which is A, C sharp, and E. That is mimicked by A major to A sharp major to A major. Same net voice movement. Both go down a half step when you go from 2 to 1 chord. So let's see what that is. So A sharp major going back down to A major. The A sharp goes down to A. A sharp. A C, A sharp major, and think here, A sharp, B, C. I think you have to go to D. Actually, the third of an A sharp major triad is D. I'll be darned. That sounds like a fourth, but it's actually, in this case, a third. And the D goes down to the C sharp of the A major triad. And then the E, the F, which sounds like a sixth, but it's actually a fifth. C, D, E, of the A sharp major triad goes down to E of the A major triad. So everything is the net voice movement of A sharp to A sharp major to A major is down a half step for each voice. And that is exactly what you get when you go from A major to D major and back to A major. Because, like I said, A major is A, C sharp, and E. D major is D, F sharp, and A. A stays the same, no big deal. Let's see, D, F sharp goes down to E, which is down a whole step. So now you have a whole step down. And then the D, E, F sharp. The D goes down to C sharp, which is the third of the A major triad. So now the D goes down a half step, while the A stays the same, and the E, F, G, and then the D, E, the F sharp goes down to E. So while one voice stays the same, one voice goes down 2 half steps, which is a whole step, and one voice goes down a half step. That's an average net voice movement of -1. Each voice in on the average went down by a half step, which is the same thing that happens with A sharp to A sharp major to A major. So there you have the triad example. That's actually just as hard as the next one I'm going to do, even though there's more notes in the next one. But so going up a half step from let's say A flat major to A major is like going from E major to A major, 5 to 1. Going down a half step, like let's say B flat major to A major, is like going down a fourth, such as D major to A major. That time I said B flat major. The first time I said A sharp major, same thing, just spelled differently. Now what he supposes next. Now I'm going to do dominant sevenths. More notes, but the other one is just as hard, at least to me. So let's have A dominant seventh. That's A, C sharp, E, and G. Now to go, I'm going to start going up by half step first. So I get A sharp dominant seventh. So that's A sharp, D, weird there again, F, and G sharp. That would be A sharp, dominant seventh. If I go down a half step from there, of course, my average root movement is the average movement of a half step. The A sharp goes down to A. The F goes down to E. The D goes down to C sharp. Hi. And the G sharp goes down to G. So like in the same case with the triads, when you go down, if you go to a A sharp dominant seventh to A dominant seventh, the net voice movement is down a half step per voice. Easy. But what's that like in circle of fifths root movement for dominant chords? Well, here's where the tricky comes in. It's the opposite as it was with the triad. With A major triad, it was 4-1. Now it's going to be 5-1, 5-7, or in this case A seventh to E seventh to A seventh, which is 5-7 to 1-7. Is going to be down a half step net voice movement. So when you go from 5-1, if in seventh chords, that's actually going down a half. It's like going down from a half step above the chord you're going to. Let's see why that is. There's the tritone in both of them, and the tritone just does a slither. In the A dominant seventh chord, you have a C sharp, and you have a G. That's a tritone. But in the 5 dominant seventh chord, it's E seventh. You have E, G sharp, B, and D. Well, the D and the G sharp make a tritone, which actually are a half step above the C sharp and the G tritone of the A dominant seventh. So that tritone just goes down a half step. So you have average root movement of 1/2 step per voice in that case. So that's the same as going down, like I said it would be. And the other difference is the A stays. Wait, there is no A. Wait, let me think. I'm going from 5 down. Okay, so the E of the E dominant seventh stays the same, and the B, as in boy, of the E dominant seventh chord goes down to A, a whole step to the A dominant seventh chord. So since 2 steps went down half steps, and 1 step stayed the same, and one moved down a whole step, which is 2 half steps, you have average movement of half step down. So there you have it. When you go from E dominant seventh to A dominant seventh, it's the same net voice movement as going from A sharp dominant seventh to A dominant seventh. Everything goes down a half step. And then when you go up a half step, let's say go from A flat dominant seventh to A dominant seventh. Everything goes up a half step. The A flat goes up to A. Let's see, A flat. The C goes up to C sharp. The E flat goes to E. E flat F. And the B flat, the G flat goes up to G, which makes there we go, there you have it. So every voice in an A flat dominant seventh, when it goes to an A dominant seventh, goes up by half step. Every one. So what's that like? That's like 4-1 movement in dominant sevenths. That's very similar, same net voice movement as D dominant seventh to A7. A7 is A, C sharp, E, and G. D dominant seventh is D, F sharp, A, and C. And when you take that net movement, first of all, what you have the tritone of G to C sharp in the A dominant seventh. You also have a tritone in the D dominant seventh, which is C to F sharp, and that tritone just slides up a half step. That's 2 voices that have half step movement. when you go from, this is going from D dominant 7th to A dominant 7th, but the A in the D dominant 7th stays the same, and the D itself in the D dominant 7 goes up a whole step to the E in the A dominant 7 chord. So two voices go up half step, one voice is the same, one voice went up a whole step, which is two half steps. That's net voice movement of half step. So there you have two examples of two different harmonies where in each case the circle of fifths harmony related to the chromatic harmony, only they were in reverse directions when you compare triads to dominant 7th chords, even though there's only all a dominant 7th chord, well, not all, but a dominant 7th chord is a major triad with an added minor 7th interval. Well, there's a lot of things that happen with that, but that's all we had to do to make it go the other way as far as the voice leader. And one last thing to say on this topic. Another way you could have seen this coming would be to just do a tritone sub for the dominant 7th case, at least. I'll explain that. Well, actually, to make what I said a little bit sound convoluted now, you can actually a dominant 7th chord can be substituted for a dominant 7th chord a tritone away. So when I said E dominant 7 to A dominant 7th, I didn't say, but it is true that you can substitute B flat dominant 7th for in the place of E dominant 7 because they have the same tritone. So not only does E7 to A7 have downward movement, it can actually be played by substituting it as B flat 7 to A7. It's not only the same, but you can actually play either one interchangeably in jazz. And the same with the 4 versus and the flat A flat. When you have D dominant 7th, that has the same tritone as A flat dominant 7th. So you can actually play an A flat dominant 7th in place of D dominant 7th, which means you can play A flat dominant 7th to A7 instead of playing D7 to D dominant 7th to A dominant 7th. But not only the same root movement, you can actually interchange them musically, which isn't true of the triad thing. It really isn't nearly as true there, if it is true at all in the other case, triad case. So there I've explained some things. When you slither up and down with 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, you actually go a certain way across the circle of fifths as you go up and down the chromatic scale with the roots, and of course vice versa. And not only that, you have a substitution thing going on there that makes those two movements actually interchangeable, which is not true of triads. But what is true in triads, if you have major triads, works for minors too, but let's just stick with major. Going up and down the chromatic scale, major triads up and down the chromatic scale has a complementary movement up and down the circle of fifths with major triads as well. So you don't usually substitute an A flat triad, major triad for an E triad, major triad, and you don't usually substitute a B flat major triad for a D major triad, but the concepts are intact and are consistent either way. Love you guys anyway. Love you guys. Peace, love, and rock and roll.